How's everybody doing? My name is Mark Anthony Neal. I am the James B. Duke Professor of African and African American Studies and also the chair of the Department of African and African American Studies. But perhaps most importantly today, I am a frequent collaborator with Ms. Gina Streety with programming over here in the Duke Research Clinic Institute. And I have the pleasure of moderating a discussion today with 5 members of law enforcement and other services here in the Durham community. And I'll begin briefly by offering a brief introduction to our panelists. I'll start with Beverly B.J. Council, who is a retired deputy police chief from the Durham City Police Department, the first Black female to reach that position in the Durham Police Department. She is also the founder of UN50, an interactive workshop that encourages honest dialogue between citizens and the local police who serve them. Welcome. Major Ron Evans is a lifelong Durham resident, husband, father, and grandfather who joined the Durham Police Department in 1981 and retired as a captain in 2008. He joined the Duke University Police Department in 2010 and was promoted to major in 2016 and now serves as the Duke University Police Department's operations commander. Jordan Hale is Director of New Student Programs and Assistant Dean of Housing and Residence Life at Duke University. He's been at Duke for over 10 years. Jordan is a father, husband, and avid reader who hails from Tallahassee. We won't hold that against you. He enjoys watching sports, walking his dog, and spending time with his son. He is currently at work on a PhD in higher education at North Carolina State University. Colin Marks is a Duke medical student originally from South Louisiana. He received his undergraduate degree from Harvard University, where he served as president of the Harvard Black Men's Forum and held other roles. He is currently in his 3rd year and dedicates most of his time to clinical research at DCRI and his role as co-president of the Student National Medical Association. Welcome, Colin. And finally, Captain Walter Take is commander at the Durham Police Department Community Service Division. He is a 23-year veteran of the City of Durham, North Carolina Police Force, serving as a division commander for the last 4 years. He has had 3 commands: District 1, Criminal Investigation, and Community Services. As a resident of Durham for over 45 years, he is committed to developing as a leader both in the community and police force. Welcome all of you to the conversation today. So before we even get into the conversation, right, we need to acknowledge that the conversation is different. The fact that we're in a room with largely Black American folks, and we're looking at a panel of Black American folks, the conversation feels a little less intense than it might have been in other circumstances. And so I'll begin with a simple question about why it has been important, at least for the law enforcement members, for you to be in a space like this to engage the community in this way.
Yeah, Ron Evans, Duke Police. The things that matter to you and you matter to us as police officers as well. We're people, we're part of the community, we're family members, we all hurt by the same things, and it's just the same things matter.
I echo what he just said. I think it's important to remember that communication is the key, and it's important from the sender and receiver. So we can't be the person that's always sending out information. We have to receive information. So we'll know how the community wants us to conduct ourselves, because ultimately we work for the community, right? So I think that's an important thing, and a lot of times you have to have dialogue and conversations to have a better understanding of your community. And if there's issues, the key, again, is communication.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. we can hear you very well.
Thank you. My voice carries a little bit. And my perspective is that we really need to have this conversation, the raw conversation about law enforcement, how you perceive law enforcement, not how police officers think you perceive law enforcement. For me, it's to have a raw, real conversation and be in the room when people stand up and say, I hate the police, trying to find out why do you hate the police, and then going from there.
When you see the illustration behind the panelists, at the center is the new cover art for Angie Thomas's novel, The Hate You Give. I don't know how many of you had the chance to read Ms. Thomas's novel or get a chance to see the film that was just released 2 weeks ago, but the film and book centers on a police shooting, in which the character there, star character, finds her voice, if you will, to speak truth to power in the context of the film. There's a critical scene, though, in the film. Her father is a retired gangbanger, for lack of a better way to describe it, who's opened up a grocery store, but her uncle is a police officer. And she has a very detailed conversation with her uncle, who's played by Common, the actor and rapper. And she's asking him about what he sees in a situation that might necessitate the use of a firearm. And she pointedly asked him, do you see a black person differently in that moment than you might see a white person? And in a moment of honesty, he says yes. And I think it's a critical conversation to have, because very often when we have these conversations about police shootings, it's not just about white police, right? It's about the idea of what blue represents in this conversation. And I was struck, even by the comments that you just made, all of us, crime is crime. Criminals are criminals, right? Part of this conversation about the shooting of folks who are unarmed, who may or may not be criminals, some of those folks are. We know criminals, right? Folks we grew up with in some cases. We all got a Pookie and Nene in our family, right? That particularly if you're law enforcement, you've gotten a call by one of your colleagues at some point about the fact that they've run into the Pookie and Nene in your life. How important is it for you as officers? And then I also ask Colin and Jordan this also, how important is it for you to think about these kinds of interactions and the expectation that black police officers should have another level of sensitivities in these interactions that perhaps is not expected of white officers?
The question is, are black police officers believed to have a higher sensitivity to the black community than white police officers?
Right, or potential black shooting victims.
Right. I think everybody thinks so. I think it's expected by a lot of people. Even in the movie, one of the black protesters said, "Brother, you should be here with me."
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But I can speak for the police officers that I know that I've worked with. Is you're a police officer. You have a job to do, and the black or white or brown at some point shouldn't matter. But I think due to implicit bias, sometimes it may. But we're taught to treat everybody the same. But I've been approached the same way, and I can easily explain to the person that brother, sister, this is about me doing my job. It's nothing personal here. And I've never had a big issue with it when I explain it that way.
Well, I would say as far as my story, I think it's important, definitely, that we're sensitive to everybody's needs, but I think when you do look at the black community, if you want to talk about the real raw issues of policing, I think that's expected. For me, it was a little different. What made me become interested, I really didn't, growing up where I grew up in Durham in public housing, and we were, when you were out there with your peers, you didn't really want to be around the police. Okay, I'm just gonna be real with you, you didn't want to be around the police. But what made me become more interested in policing was one of my teammates when I played football at Northern High School, his father was a Durham police officer, Major James. And he was a white male, and he came to our practice, and I was looking at him like, there's the police. But I didn't want to go near him because I was like, oh my God, I was told not to go near the police. So I got to know Major James, and he was really a nice person to me. And my thought process, because we all had these dreams when we were kids, I want to be the president. Didn't happen for me. But he had me to look at policing from another angle. It was a sign. It was a side of kindness. He showed compassion and he cared about people, right? And he wasn't a black male. But as I became a police officer and growing up in my neighborhood and going back, it was expected of me to be more sensitive than others to this demographic. And it was told to me by my family members, some of my cousins. They expect it out of me. So that expectation, a lot of times people don't want to admit it, that they have biases. Everybody in this room all have biases, right? And we all look for diversity. Diversity is just being invited, but I think what everybody wants is a seat at the table, right? So when we talk about that expectation shouldn't just be put on one culture or race. It should be for everybody, but we know that's the expectation.
BJ?
Okay, I think for me is that I was born in the eastern part of the state, never around police officers. I was born that I was raised in where tobacco was, and I became a police officer because I needed a job. So for me, it was how I was raised, on how to interact with individuals no matter who they are. What I also learned during these conversations that I have is that we have to also remember that when you talk about a white officer, you got to figure out where he's coming from, what's his journey. I mean, I've met individuals, white officers and white individuals, and say, I've just never been around black people. And so basically where their stuff comes from is what they see on television, what the media feeds to them, that black males are X, black males are Y, and those types of things. And then they become law enforcement, and they're still feeding off of the mirror that they have been given. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're prejudiced. It just means that it's up to the agency to figure out a way to help them move beyond that. So for me, it's more of the journey of the individual who has that uniform on instead of him just being a police officer.
I'm just, thinking back. So I grew up outside of New Orleans, about an hour outside of New Orleans. And I'm just thinking back on, where I grew up in the relationship that we had with the police department and the sheriff's department. I think that in our community, if you were a black police officer, you were certainly expected to be able to see things differently, because most likely you had also grown up in the same community, and you should be able to relate, you should be able to see people, your cousin, your neighbor's child, and the people you're interacting with. And not only do I think that this expectation exists, but I'd say that when there were police officers that my friends and I or anyone knew that almost didn't seem to relate, it was worse for them than it was for a white cop, because the ignorance that we felt they were displaying was a willful ignorance. We felt that they knew better, and despite that, still, acted accordingly, fell in line with, what we normally expect from a police officer.
Just really quickly, I would love to add one thing to kind of tie all these different points together, is I think it's really important for us to think about the power of our narratives, right? So each person, as they gave an example, talked about a story, whether it was seeing an officer for the first time at football practice, or whether it was officers who may not understand people's stories, or whether it was, black officers who didn't come around or who came around and then people were judging them because they didn't seem to understand the stories. I think what we've gotten away from is the importance of each individual stories. And I know it takes time to learn stories. I know it takes time to invest in people because we want everything quickly. We want everything in the form of a tweet or in the form of something we can microwave. So when we take the time to really understand and think about each other's stories, it makes it a lot easier to then understand where somebody else may be coming from. And that's why I love this book also, because it brings sort of a vision to this story so that we can see, feel, and then really empathize to then make decisions and think about things.
I want to pick up on something that Colin just said. Officers who have a familiarity with their communities. I grew up in New York City, late 60s, early 70s. What I do remember about that experience with police is that police walked a beat, right? They walked through the community, so they got to know what was happening on the ground. It wasn't just a drive through a neighborhood, trying to scan what was going on. I see a city like New York City now, particularly in terms of white officers, they're policing in black neighborhoods in the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens, but they're living in Westchester County and Suffolk County. One of the most heartening things I heard about all the narratives of the law enforcement office here is that you live in Durham, right? So that if something goes down that might be a little funky, right, what you know is that when you go to Kroger or Harris Teeter, there's a good chance that you might actually see folks from that community in the supermarket. And they're going to hold you accountable in a certain kind of way, where white officers who don't live in communities where they police, they never have those and they never get to see the everyday humanity of these folks. All three of the officers here, you've been in leadership positions. How important do you think it is for officers in a particular force to be residential in the places that they patrol?
Yeah, I don't think it should be a requirement, but I think it's great. It's a choice that I made. It's a choice that we've made here. You protect your own community. The people in the community know you. And just, Doctor, something you hit on before is you have to see them out in public before.
Right.
I had a sort of violent encounter. This was maybe in the mid-'80s, late '80s, with a young man. It was actually a fight. And he didn't fare as well as I did. And the situation is he had attacked his girlfriend. The first officer got there, he was trying to take the officer's gun. And so it was no time to play, no time to negotiate at that. And that happened one evening, and maybe 5, 6 years ago, I was going in a convenience store in a 7-Eleven, and I pulled up in my car and I noticed a young man go, and he's holding the door for me. And I thought, well, that is very nice. I didn't expect it. And so when I went in the store, he greeted me politely and went in the store, and he said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "No, sir." I said, "I've seen you somewhere, but I don't remember." And so he relived that encounter. And he said, "I just want to tell you," he said, "I have no hard feelings against you." He said, "I was wrong." He said, "You treated me with respect even after everything happened." And several times I've ran into people that, I've had to arrest and stuff. Never, ever have I had a negative encounter in Durham. Never. And I think most of us can speak to the same thing. And, it's how you treat people and how you perceive them. It's just where they are in life at that time. You have to meet them there.
Same thing here. I think talk low. But I think it's same thing. I think it's very important. When I first started, I think it was one of the requirements you had to live in Durham, but things have changed now. I think if officers can live in the community they work in, it provides more visibility, and you're just gonna have more encounters. You become more visible to your community. A lot of times when we're around people more, we get to know them a little bit better, right? Same here. I've had people that I've arrested in my community, and I've been in Virginia with a dead battery, and I'm no other store in sight, and they see me and they like, "Hey, how you doing today? Let me give you a jump." And I was like, "I arrested him." But they were nice to me. So, I thought that was great. And they told me, like, maybe I'm doing something right here, So, again, living in the community, living and working in your community is important. I feel like for me personally, of course, my wife would want to move because she just want to move. But I have a sense of pride of working in the community that I grew up in, right? My grandma still lives in District 2 where I grew up in a house with 15 people. But every time I go back and I see it, I feel good about walking around in that community. And nobody bothers me, right? They know I'm the police. Where I work at now, Station 1, is off Holloway and Calvin Street. My grandma lived 2 houses over. The boys club where I went to is like 1 block up. The park I played in is Long Meadow. These are all fond memories for me. And so Chief Allen lived on Chester Street's family around the corner. And so the last probably decade, I've been stationed at Station 1, and everybody's like, "Aren't you ready to leave?" I was like, "I'm at home." it's always good to be where you're loved, and you're loved at home. We all have problems. You could be in another community, there might be problems, but the community that I grew up in, these are my problems. So I feel like I have a duty to respond to them. Now, everything ain't always gonna go nice. Things happen, people ask questions, and sometimes they're tough questions, as we said before, the raw topic of conversation. And you have to be willing to take some tough criticism if you want to grow as a community. Because, listen, Durham Police Department is not perfect, but we're striving for perfection. So, again, just important, I think, to be a part of your community.
In this time and age, I think it's kind of, you shouldn't think the officers are going to stay in the same city. I mean, I think we need to move beyond that. What I think the expectation should be is that they get out of their cars, they get to know the neighbors. You can ask your police department, you know, as part of the, it's a job. So there is a performance evaluation. What's on their performance evaluation? How many community problems have they solved? Not how many crimes have they solved, but how many basic community problems have they solved? You know, do they attend community meetings after hours to meet the individuals who live in those particular meetings? Also, there are some police departments who now start to, if there is a police officer that wants to get on a track to be supervisors, there are particular tracks that they get on. Are they getting on the track that mirrors the philosophy of the agency, community policing, problem-solving types of things? Those are the kind of things that you as a community can help determine. The officer doesn't have to see you in Kroger's, but it'd be nice to see after he gets off, he doesn't mind going to a community policing meeting, and he believes in the philosophy of the police department.
Or the local Starbucks.
Or the local Starbucks, whatever, yes.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes.
I kind of want to take this conversation back to where we started with kind of how the community perceives police officers. And you mentioned something about an officer having bias or having a prejudice because that's where he comes from. But when does it make sense to give that person a job that involves a rifle or a gun and that becomes a part of him? How do you control when he uses that based on emotion versus using the actual law to pull his gun out? Because I think we're seeing a lot of what's written here on this PowerPoint is that these biased and prejudiced officers are resorting to violence before actually looking at the situation. Like, it's their first response when it shouldn't be. So how do you, as Black officers, notice and call out the prejudice of officers who may not be African American, may not be used to seeing African Americans in their community? Because Durham, we are predominantly African American. This was a Black city. I grew up here all my life. And I've seen it change. And some are good, some are bad, but we're using the police, I think, as a customer service line. And how do we address that part too? Like, I have so many questions, I'm sorry. The first question is, why are we giving the prejudiced and biased police officer a gun? And the second is, how do we tell our community that you can't use 911 to call it on Black folks and not expect the repercussions of a police encounter, a violent encounter?
Can I answer that? You're right on where I love to go. We can't, there's no way, I mean, just like you can hire an individual, you're not going to know whether or not they're racist. That's not a box on the application, okay? So I mean, that's just something that's never going to, I mean, you got racists probably in this building, so you just don't know that. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So don't think that's not going to be in the police department. Right. The only thing that we can hope is that we understand, he or she knows what they're supposed to do, that we have supervisors that help handle and hold them accountable, and if they don't, then there are repercussions. Okay. There's also the issue of the Black community fails to file police complaint. Right. That's why I started UN50. We do not file complaints because we don't think there's going to be any justice that happens. And I can tell you, and the gentleman that in here that with Durham Police Department, as a police executive, I need to know. I'm not riding around with that police officer at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know that he's rude to you unless you tell me that. Instead of you standing up in front of WRL going, well, he always been down here, and now he done shot somebody, and now you tell me he's been rude. Which doesn't mean that he's going to be terminated, but now I'm going to check him. And then there's a system within the organizations that has well, BJ's been complained on 3 times. We need to bring her in and retrain her. So there's some onus on us as a community to hold the police department. What do you have in place, police department, that if something ticks? What's your philosophy, police department, so it makes it comfortable for the rest of the officers in your department to say, oh, I got my buddy next to me, he's a racist because of X, Y, Z, or it looks like it. And that is comfortable for me as a police officer to be able to say that and report that without feeling like I'm going to have some repercussion from my agency.
Because what you're actually pointing out, right, is that what we experience in terms of police experience is very different than what the data suggests, right? And everything is being dictated by the data, right? The folks are responding to the data. If the data doesn't stand up to what we're experiencing, right, we're not going to get the kind of or some direction towards the kind of accountability that we're expecting. I sent Gina a piece last night of black officers in Philadelphia saying that all of their white colleagues needed to see the hate you give. And it was a way to talk about this issue of accountability. You all have been in leadership positions, so you can think about that very differently. But for the rank and file, right, are they actively having conversations with their white colleagues about sensitizing them to what race means in these communities? Right? What does it mean for black men to essentially be the most recognizable trope of criminality in American society? Are black officers having those conversations with their peers?
So I would say one of the things I think is we've always been a train heavy police department. I mean, every time I turn around, I have training. So this week I went to diversity inclusion training for the city of Durham. Every city employee has to take it. And you start having some tough conversations in those classes. And we also had classes recently, in the last couple of years, for all supervisors to address bias and equity in the communities and different privileges. And those conversations, we talk about a bunch of commanders in there from different places. It's going to be a heated conversation, right? And it's going to be an intense conversation sometimes, but that's what we have to have. But I want to answer your question. So we have a police excellence program during Police Department, and it's back to what Deputy Chief Counsel always called it. I still call it respect. And so, if and it comes down to supervision, right? So we have to inspect what we expect of people. And one of the things that we have now, what we didn't have when I started, a while back, I won't talk about the date, but if an officer has 3 use of forces in 3 months, then there's a flag. We have software that flags that. If they have unusual conduct or behavior that's reported by a citizen, and that goes back to what was mentioned earlier, do you report what you see, right? Or if the supervisor is noticing something, and that's why it's important for our first line supervisors, our sergeants, our corporals, to really supervise their officers. Be on the calls with them, watch them. What is unusual about them? Do you see something that's off? There's unusual behavior? Have they had too many use of forces? And what happened is our professional standards division will send a report to the commander, and we have to look at it and see, okay, they've had this many. Let's look at all the cases they've had. Let's read them. Okay, what do we need to do with this particular officer at this point? What type of training is needed? And if necessary, what type of discipline is needed for this officer? So we have a citizens review board, and the members on the board is appointed by the city manager and approved by the city council. And if you have a case, a lot of times people say, well, I didn't think what was fair went on with the police. They investigated. What? You have up to 30 days after you receive your findings from your case to ask for the Citizens Review Board to review your case. A lot of police departments don't have that, but in Durham, we have that here. So we have more checks and balances than what people know, and that's why it's important to have these conversations. So then, okay, people are getting checked. I'm pretty sure everybody that's been in the police department of some type of command structure, they've had to make some tough decisions, also recommending termination for officers. I've done it. I thought it was appropriate for what they did. I'm not going to talk about what it was actually, but we've all had to make tough decisions, and that's the part where you're saying, how are we checking our officers? So there are mechanisms in place that probably hadn't been in place a couple of decades ago that are in place now to check officers, and there's more training for officers. But I think the key is if you see something that's out of place, don't, like I said, don't go to WRL and be like, I'm not telling you can't, but I think the appropriate thing to be is like, how are we gonna correct the problem if we don't know that there's a problem going on?
Let me ask you this question though, Captain. What do you do though with that supervisor who's looking at that unusual behavior and in his mind or her mind goes, well, that unusual behavior might be necessary for policing an unusual neighborhood in that person's mind? That the extraordinary nature of the community, right? You mentioned District 1, right? And only because you named the streets, I knew where that was. And then I'm like, there's some time of the day that I'm not driving through District 1, right? If you're a police officer who thinks that a certain kind of policing that's unusual from what policing that might occur in Cary needs to occur in District 1, and that person is a supervisor, how do you deal with it in that context?
I'm gonna have a problem immediately because I live in District 1. Okay, so and I have since I've been on the police department. But again, supervision. You have a senior officer, a master officer, a corporal, a sergeant, a lieutenant, a captain, assistant chief, a deputy chief, a chief. So when I say inspect what you expect, it's not just the responsibility of that corporal and sergeant. That lieutenant is an operations commander for that division. It is their responsibility to get out of the swivel chair and get out into the field. Yeah. Me as a captain, I go out into the field all the time. I'm not gonna stand behind my desk. Some nights I might have to stay late, 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock. That's part of the job, right? You accepted it. But you have to go out and expect what your troops are doing. My assistant chief, he's my supervisor. He's here with me today, right? And how we learn is constructive feedback. That's not appropriate. That's appropriate. Thank you for doing this. Let's have a conversation that was done incorrectly. Those are the tough conversations, and you have to have mechanisms in place when you promote people and you put people in situations to be commanders, to be leaders, and be supervisors. Is this the right person? Knowledge, skills, and ability, interpersonal skills, right? Is this the right person for this job? And that's how you start making corrections.
Yeah, yeah.
So to the point that you just made, that it's appropriate to assess the knowledge, skills, and abilities of a person before you give them a certain assignment. I think another point that the panelists made was that there's not a lot of effort made to identify biases during the initial selection process. And to me, I think that can become very problematic because you can be inviting people into your ranks who may have some biases that they've developed over the course of their life. And is it fair to think that the training that you receive within a short amount of time is enough to reverse those biases that they could have developed over the course of their life? I think you mentioned the love that you have for your community and how you feel when you go to certain areas within your community. But we also know that, I think a comment was made that, officers don't just stay in the same city. People are going from different places to different departments and they move around. And so people bring with them their biases. And so has there been any conversation about maybe changing the selection process and adding some type of tool or assessment that would allow you to be able to determine if a person is likely to have, implicit biases that may not be productive for policing in certain communities?
Okay, great question. And ma'am, this goes back to what you asked too. I want to respond to you as well. At Duke Police, we measure a person's emotional intelligence prior to hiring process. And I know of outstanding candidates on paper that were denied a job because of what we found through the intelligence testing, the emotional intelligence testing. I think it's a very important tool, and we do it for everyone, and it is it carries more weight than most other things in whether we decide to hire this person or not. And the bias, it takes a lifetime. It takes a lifetime, and in 2 weeks of diversity training, I think make very little changes. But an open-minded, reasonable person should know that this is day one, and they should learn from that, and every day try to do better. Okay.
Colin?
So one of the things I would say too, to get to your question, as far as the Durham Police Department, we do testing also, assessment centers is what we call it now, and even when we do review boards, it's diverse. We try to make sure it's diverse, and our HR approves whatever process that we have. And you have different questions in different sections in their topics, whether it's your knowledge, your diversity, community engagement, it starts asking all these questions to start filtering out. Because you might think, oh man, this person's gonna put in for this position, they're gonna be great. And you think this person's gonna be the person you're gonna get. Not gonna happen. Didn't hit all the requirements. Didn't measure out as we thought. Now this person needs to go back with some more training and bring them up to where they need to be. Great person, but just not there.
You know, there's part of this conversation obviously was not an exploration of Durham policing, right? We're thinking about policing more broadly. But I'm sure there are folks in the audience who are hearing the kind of checks and balances that are here in Durham, but are still wondering how the officer who shoots a Tamir Rice gets another job in law enforcement, right? And we hear those narratives over and over again. How does that actually happen?
I think you hit on the question and point I was about to raise. I think all these points about what Durham has been able to do are fantastic, man. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the case across this country. And you know, I think we can point to an incident in all 50 states to show that. And so with that being said, I've always thought about, you can have really great police departments, like here in Durham, and then maybe, right next door you'll have a police department that's, notorious for incidents. So is there like a pathway? Do you all believe there's a pathway for addressing some of these issues of bias on a larger scale?
I think one of the biggest pathways is leadership, right? So I think one of the biggest pathways is leadership. Leadership is crucial in policing. And so it's not like if you were somewhere outside of the United States and they had a state police. There are hundreds of police departments throughout the United States with different training requirements. So for me, being in North Carolina, the training requirement might not be as heavy as, I don't know, another state. I don't want to call anybody out, but a lot of times we go to places. I went for some research for our police department in Indianapolis, and it was geared towards bringing our community together through faith-based. But when we started looking around, different agencies were there too, but we were real heavy in the training, and I'm taking you somewhere. We were real heavy in the training arena. So your leadership a lot of times is going to dictate. The state is going to tell you what you have to have as a baseline, right? But your leadership is going to tell you, you also need this, 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 and this. So I'm going to use myself as an example, right? I can speak about my journey. It's hard to speak about somebody else's journey. I have been to several leadership schools, but recently I got accepted into our PERF in Boston. It's taught by Harvard professors. It's the Police Executive Research Forum, Senior Management Institution for Policing, right? I've been to our West Point class and other training, leadership and liability, but that's how you start addressing that, is through the training and your leadership. You have to make changes in your agency, and how your leader goes is how your agency is going to go.
So how can you, I think my other question is, how can you normalize that? At what leadership level? So at what leadership level, what you need to get to in order to normalize this training, right?
The officer. The leadership starts on the ground. That officer is actually a leader in the community, a leader in the organization. So actually the groundwork starts on the bottom. So I don't really care what I believe as a deputy police chief. I love the community, I lead community policing. But if that sergeant and an officer down on the bottom doesn't believe that, then I'm dead in the water. I'm dead in the water. So the thing is, I have to ask the community to tell me what's going on. How's your interaction with my sergeant? How's your interaction with that police officer? I'll give you an example. Asheville PD. Do you remember the incident earlier this year where the gentleman was beaten in Asheville? that it broke, right? It happened in 2017, but the media broke it this year, okay? That police chief, when she got hired, did implicit bias training, racial equity training. She did it all. She even invited the community in, 17 community members in, to include NAACP and a social justice group, to come in and help her write her use of force policy. Who does that? She brought them in to help her because she wanted them to be part of her philosophy. Yet and still, this officer went out and did what he did. Okay? So he probably could have walked out of a diversity train at 5 o'clock that afternoon and assaulted that guy at 2 o'clock. The hero in this story is the guy that was assaulted. He went the next day, filed a complaint. She immediately took him off the street. He has now been charged. So the bottom line, and the sergeant, you were talking about the supervisor, she got dinged because when they went back and looked at his video camera, he had also been verbally abusive to other black individuals in the Asheville. She hadn't reviewed it. So the bottom line, leadership is good, but the leadership needs to be down at the bottom.
Can I respond to your question real quick in regards to, you talked about how does an officer go from one agency to another. My experience is unions. State of North Carolina, unions. State of North Carolina, state of South Carolina, state of Virginia are 3 states that are right to work states. Many of your other states are unionized. And so your union has a large component of what is allowed to include what the state legislation will have in place. State of North Carolina, if we right to work, if we've got an officer that we feels like is not cutting the mustard, we terminate that officer. They have a right to grieve up to a certain level. And after that, it's done. There are places, state of Florida, Ohio, other places, Philadelphia. Chiefs of police have fired people 3 and 4 times, but they have systems in place because of the unions that will allow these people to get their jobs back. So really, the chiefs of police or the commissioners don't have any power or pull to really manage their own staff, to remove people out of their systems. So that's been my experience.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mine is kind of in 2 parts. First, Jordan, I'd like to hear what your story is in terms of your experience as a police officer. And my other question is, what is your perspective, any of you? I have 2 sons. They're both adults now, but I get calls from them constantly, especially since they were young adults, about being randomly stopped. What is your perspective of the officer that may be doing that? And it's never a black officer. What do you think prompts pulling an African American driver over when there's no speeding, there's no reckless driving, there's nothing going on? I mean, and I understand that random stops happen, just for checking or what have you, but that happens all the time. Has that ever happened to any of you when you're not in uniform? And I'm really bothered by the fact that I've had to say, keep your cool, don't overreact. I shouldn't have to speak those things to my sons. They're 33 and 35 now, but I still have to say that. I still have to say that.
Let me attach a secondary piece to that question, right? Because the film actually opens with a visualization of what we do to talk. Right, and Jordan, I know you have a 10-year-old son. I don't know whether you've had the talk with them yet, but I'm sure we've all, in terms of family members and our own children, have had some variation of the talk that's connected to the fact that we know these random stops.
So a couple things. Well, I'm not an officer, but thank you for the compliment. The second thing is he's not 10, he's 2, but I will say, and I want us to talk about this, right? Like you, because he is a young black boy, you still think about these things all the time. So police officers come up in children's books. They come up in videos that we may be watching. And he will ask questions about police. I mean, he's a pretty talkative kid. But even how they are described in the books, you would be really surprised at, the positive language and all the good things that come from that. So that excites me. And I think about when he's 10 and when he's 12 and when he's 34, and somehow he goes from a cute, intelligent child to dangerous. And how does that evolution happen over time? And I know that I'm going to have that conversation over time because my father had it with me, and his father had it with really his mother had it with him, and so we know that conversation will happen. But I think that's the part of the challenge is the fact that I know that that is going to happen. And I'm hoping that through the continuous programs, it sounds like Durham and Duke are doing a great job. So we got to figure out how to scale up so that other departments can have. But I balance that with it's a lived everyday experience, and that's taking off the panelist hat and putting on the parent hat, right? Like that is something I think about all the time. It's something that my wife and I talk about all the time. Is what happens when he goes from this to something else. And you can see signs, even in a 2-year-old, and how teachers work with them, and how peers receive them. About at some point they become dangerous, and that's difficult to manage.
We often talk about this conversation in the context of black boys. If I'm looking at the footage of the young girl who was attacked in Coral Springs, Florida last week, that's a 14-year-old girl. There was another story 3 years ago of a black girl in Texas. We know in our schools now, because of resource officers, there are increasing confrontations between 14 and 15-year-old black girls who act like 14 and 15-year-old black girls, right? I got a 15-year-old, I know. And school resource officers who don't have an experience with the way that black girls speak their mind in certain kind of contexts. And increasingly, we're seeing these kind of confrontations. Anybody want to?
I just wanted to thank you for asking that question. Sorry to backtrack for a second, but this is important because I don't think when we hear about these instances of people getting stopped for maybe questionable reasons, and having it happen to be like a black person, people hear about things like that and think that it's exaggerated, or it's a one-time thing, or that it doesn't happen often. That happens a lot. It happened to me. My first time being pulled over, I was 16. I was going to my grandma's house, and it's funny. I vividly remember this story because I don't think I had my license for that long, and so I wasn't trying to do anything to get in trouble and get my car taken away or get driving privileges taken away. And I was going through an area where like a residential area. I saw a police officer, didn't think anything of it. I got out of the area. The speed limit changed to 55. I speed up, and the police officer turns his lights on. And so, I get pulled over. I get out of the car, and he walks up to me and he says, I wasn't going to pull you over, but you sped up after. That was his reason for pulling me over. That, I was speeding, despite the speed limit having changed. Now, to fast forward and give y'all some background, he ended up being a police officer that was fired a few months later for something different that he had done. But nonetheless, he had pulled me over for allegedly speeding, even though I wasn't. And not only did that happen, his second question to me, before I had even, gotten to a point of pulling my license out, was, "Do you have any drugs in the car?" At 16 years old, do you have any drugs in the car? And I think I just wanted to highlight that question again because I think there's something to be said about that. Because this isn't something that's only happened to me. I've gotten to college and heard similar stories from people that I've gone to school with.
And I would say, as a young person of color, and this is, black, white, or anybody from sort of a marginalized or oppressed population, it almost becomes it's battle scars, right? Like you just get used to it, and so you get numb to it because it happens so often. And so, you could be talking to friends or buddies, and it almost becomes like a one-up game of how dangerous was your story, right? And so I think that's a good point about this. You don't want to lose track of that, and but that's powerful, and that's sad, and that's scary, right? And then I think I would sort of add and couple that with you know, we understand and know that that the police have a very difficult job. I think that's understood. I think a lot of the things that were described here were very systematic approaches to solving those problems. So make sure you report. Make sure you do. It's hard to do that when you don't trust the people you're reporting to, right? So it's hard to believe in a system when the system has failed you for years and years and years and years. Like I love watching the 30 for 30 documentaries that ESPN does, and I was watching one about OJ, and so you got all the police stuff that happens with that, right? Which is a whole nother situation. But then I'm watching the one about the University of Miami, and it starts off with police riots. Right, and so this narrative is one that people have been talking about. I mean, the hate you give is from that Thug Life piece. It's from Tupac's music, right? And so this is something we've been talking about for years and years and years. So it's hard to hear, like, reported when for years and years that has been the course of action, and we're still here today talking about this. So I think that's the challenge with it.
Yeah, so I think, Jordan, you nailed it. We talked about the reporting structures and things that we can do to kind of address challenges. How do you suggest we do that when we don't trust you?
At some point, you're going to have to, because we can't do it internally. Because, like I said, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to know that officers out there being weird. I'm just not going to know that. And so and then also getting involved, also finding out there need to be more, become part of the police department.
I actually have a
don't
criminal
want to
justice degree.
Join the police department.
And that was part of the plan. But part of my challenge, and actually my stepfather was chief of police for my sheriff's department.
Okay.
Because of my negative encounters with police officers, I strayed completely away from that opportunity.
But,
because I couldn't see myself standing in a space and calling myself your teammate if I didn't trust you.
But you would bring the trust to the thing. You would help change that paradigm shift by being in that space. Okay, that's what we need. We need more people that look like us in the building.
But Deputy Police
BJ,
Chief,
you can say BJ.
This is the one thing, when I hear that, right, it doesn't sound too much different than folks trying to deal with black-white diversity in institutions like this, and black folks being told that you have to do the extra work, right, to help educate white folks to act better. What we're hearing is that the citizens actually have to put in more labor to help police departments to police crimes.
So can I answer this question real quick? Answer that question quick. So I think it's important what the chief said is that you have to be involved. That's one piece. It's a mixed bag. And I believe in what she said. I want to be part of this because I'm gonna help change this narrative. And at the end of the day, some people might like me and some people might not. I'm gonna change this narrative, right? And you have to have people that are qualified, criminal justice degree, you have some background, to do this job. It's not an easy job. It wears on you. And so I know in 3.5 years, 4.5 years, I won't be here. I'll be retired. I need somebody. I have a 26-year-old, 24, and a 6-year-old. I need somebody coming in behind me. Been married for a while. But I need somebody coming in behind me that I know has the right moral fiber and the right intentions, and they want to do the right thing. So that's a big part. So reaching out, this was the other part about what is the police going to do to reach out to the community? Well, I'm Community Services Division Commander, and we have a ton of programs that we reach out to the community, from kids all the way up to adults, from Police Athletic League, dealing with 700 kids a year, for golf, basketball, baseball, soccer. I mean, we have a range of things that we do. Police Explorers, all the way up to crisis intervention. Today, we got a call where some people needed housing. My team went out there. We knew that the building was going to be condemned because of the owner. Well, guess what? My team was tasked with, we need to help find them housing. So we're making an effort. A lot of these things, and we're getting better as a police agency, doing the social media and letting people know what we do, right? But a lot of times, people don't know that we have each month a free summer camp for kids. Well, it's educational. It's not just fun. We're taking them to the museums. We're teaching them about the legal system and letting them have a mock trial and serve as a judge or serve as a lawyer. We're doing these things. So it's engagement happening.
Let me take these two questions. Yeah, Sherilyn, and then.
So I had just a question to follow up on what you were saying. So, and I will admit that this is probably me making assumptions, not fully understanding the way that police organizations are structured, but there's definitely a perception, you hear about this blue line, right? And like
Yes.
this fraternal feeling of police and this sort of, this police officer might be rogue, but his partner or the partner might be protecting that person's rogue behavior.
Right.
So I understand what you're saying about the supervisors needing to have knowledge of what's happening on the ground, but can you talk a little bit about what's being done to break up that bystander culture? Because I have a very hard time believing that there are not a lot of cops who are good cops and know that their peers are not engaging in moral behavior, but maybe are feeling pressured because of whatever culture exists within the police structure to not report that bad behavior.
I was born and raised in Durham, but now I live out in the suburbs. So my question is, when we call for help, the Durham PD doesn't show up, the sheriff shows up. And the sheriff, he doesn't look anything like me, most of them that we've seen out in our area. And that terrifies me. Nothing scares me more than this white sheriff, his deputy, or even when we're in the outskirts and the highway patrol stops you and he's white. That's terrifying to me. So what my question is, are they subjected to the checks and balances that you all talk about? Are they going through these trainings? Are they aware of their implicit bias? Are they aware that my sons, who look like offensive linemen, professional offensive linemen, are of no threat to them because we've had the talk? Use your yes sir, yes ma'am, you know, be respectful, no sudden moves. So are they going through that training? Because, I mean, I'm comfortable with Durham PD. Grew up here, know what to expect. But when I go out to the county, those sheriffs, those highway patrolmen that's out there stopping us on the road because, you know, your registration expired, it's terrifying.
To answer your question, that would be the philosophy of the agency, what the culture is. You talk about larger organizations, the philosophy is set that that the police chief and his or her administration is saying, I'm not going to tolerate this. And it goes all the way down. At some point, you're going to miss stuff, but eventually somebody's going to step up. And once that they start holding individuals accountable, that's when it starts, oh, they're serious about that. Like the thing I was telling you about Asheville. You can trust and believe that that sergeant who missed it will never do that again. Because she's been made an example of, this is my philosophy in this agency. So it's actually, once we understand what that is and we find out, and we hold individuals accountable, then it begins to have a ripple effect across the agency. But also remember, I think somebody said that there are 18,000 law enforcement departments across this country. Over half of them are less than 25 employees. Okay, so you also got to follow the money. All right, so they're not going to get the same kind of training. Because you got the police departments that have 10 police officers in their whole department. They can't afford all this money of sending people to PERF. Leadership training, explicit bias. So the community has to get involved. When you're talking about larger agencies who have $1 million plus that can do the type of training that Durham people, you're sitting in a good city that does that. But you go to some little small town in Louisiana, you got to roll through. Ferguson, okay, that was doing stuff on the back of African Americans. Nobody those checks and balances. But when you have an agency that does that in philosophy, that's when those checks and balances, and you know, it is sticky on both sides of the coin. I heard some rumbling about the system and making us have to do that. But there is some responsibility on each side of us to hold each other accountable. To answer your question as far as the Sheriff's Department is concerned, I don't know. I don't know whether anybody up here knows what kind of training. I'm sure they are doing some kind of training, but we don't know.
Yeah, it's state mandated.
It is the minimum state mandatory. But anything beyond that is going to be something that the leadership decides on.
Yeah, ma'am, if I can address your concern about traffic stops, all that's recorded, that data is collected. In the state of North Carolina, we do it when the driving while black conversations came up years ago. Okay, our legislature mandated that on every single traffic stop where there's not a written citation or some document of who you stop, you know, we have to indicate whether it's the demographics of the person and the reason for the stop. And that information is available to you. At Duke Police, we check on at least quarterly to make sure we're in line with what we should be in line with. And I think most police departments do. Durham Police Department does the same thing. And it's something that we look at frequently.
What if there is no reason?
Okay, you know what, you use the word, there is no such thing as a random stop. Okay, because look, listen what I'm trying to tell you. Don't get in his or her head, don't get in the police officer's head. The object of the stop is to get home. If you think it was random, if you think they stopped you because you were black, get through the interaction, get through the stop, and go file a complaint on them. That's the only way. So because you can get stopped for weaving inside the lane. It's justifiable. So get out of the police officer's head, stay in your head, stay calm, get through the interaction, survive the interaction so your sons can call you later. Then y'all hightail it up to the police department and complain on the officer because you didn't feel good about the interaction. That's how you start making change.
I think that is, I think it's a good example. I think it's really hard to believe that that's going to be the outcome when in so many cases, and so I think that, and I hope we get. I know it's 3, so I know we got to go. But I hope we really get to have a conversation about the system, because I want to go back to the system and the approaches in the system. And if we don't trust the system, how do we flip the system? That's what's happening in our communities around the country. Right. Students don't like stuff with gun violence; they're flipping the system. Right. I want to talk about the system and a reporting system and how can, like, all the information about how we can get engaged is important, but right. I think the system is what's broken, right? And so how do we challenge the system?
So, wait, I want him to explain what the system.
So I hear if you feel like you're being randomly stopped, which it sounds like maybe there aren't random stops, but if you feel that way, you go and you tell an officer, and then people get dinged, and this amount of time happens within 3 months, and then this can happen. Yeah, so I think that's our challenge as citizens, is like when you have been living in a system, in a place where there hasn't been immediate action, or you've been telling people for literally centuries, about what's been going on with policing. Right, it's hard to be patient with. You've been doing the same thing over and over again, so keep doing that. I think it's a challenge.
Get the last question because it's 3 o'clock. Okay, great. So as a black male, I think we can all agree to that, right? So I had the pleasure of coming through a city to where they embrace the notion of community policing. Now, coming up through the 90s, I see where community policing switched into an occupying force in the same neighborhood. So the notion of random stops, I have been sitting with friends, police officers come up, search everybody, when months ago we were just kicking it and cooling it, playing midnight basketball when that program was still out. So we have to have that discussion about what changed in the police philosophy across, I guess, departments across North Carolina in general. In terms of, we went from actually being a friendly force to this occupying thing with this surplus military equipment. I've seen communities where they actually intentionally drive these cars through for intimidation. They don't do that in my neighborhood. My neighborhood has about 5 or 6 Durham police officers, Durham sheriff, Raleigh firemen in my neighborhood. So my neighborhood didn't get that. But I know certain parts of Durham, they do it. Now, to her point, I travel often. I feel good in Durham. I know quite a few Durham police officers, a lot of them are fraternity brothers. When I leave outside of Durham, I'm not comfortable, and I travel often. So I think, so I don't know, maybe that's because my upbringing. My question is, at what point will we really go back to a true sense of community policing and try to decrease this old militarization of police departments?
I guess for me, and I'm just, what I'm trying to do with my program is tell people they have rights. So if you are sitting on the corner and a police officer walks up on you and starts talking to you, you don't have to talk to him. You don't. I mean, you don't, because and I hear theoretically, you don't. You really don't.
Until you get intimidated to where you have to respond.
You don't have to
do something.
Okay, so what you're telling me is that they have just allowed you to go where they want you to go. They have just said something to you that have made you go south, and now you're going to go to jail. Right. So I guess that's what I'm just trying to get people to understand. You do have rights, okay? And the professional in that interaction is a police officer. I have NC students, when I was doing this presentation, he told me, he said, you're just taking the power away from me. You can do whatever you want to do. What I'm telling you, you have a right to say, I would prefer not to talk to you, police officer. I would prefer to speak to a lawyer. That is your right. You have just applied the Fifth Amendment to yourself. If he continues to talk to you, let him talk to you. And then you ask him, can I leave? If he says yes, then leave. Don't run, just leave.
What if he says no?
Then you gotta stay there until he finished doing whatever he has to do.
So
And
that
then
was
if you
my
don't,
point.
what-
Can I say one thing? I know you got 3 o'clock, and I want to say this because I see some things now in different ways, and I'm different ways. But I want to say this so people know. If you don't feel comfortable talking to a police officer, if you don't feel comfortable reporting to a police officer, you can report it to City Hall. You can call Durham 1, call with us. You ain't got to talk to the police. You can talk to the city manager. You can also do it online. However, whatever makes you feel comfortable.
Captain, I think what you're also hearing is that the kind of rights that are suggested that we have, that doesn't actually play out in the interaction.
Right.
We're thinking like if we like don't talk to me, we might actually get shot.
Right. I'm going back to where some people said they didn't feel comfortable reporting it to the police, or WRA happens that night. So it's still going to be a process regardless, right, that you have to go through. And I'm just telling you, everybody doesn't feel comfortable talking to the police. And if you don't want to talk to them, there are other ways to report. The key...
In a lot of instances, there shouldn't have been a situation to have to deal with.
Right.
I mean, my son told me about, he walked up to the ATM, got his money, got back in the car, called his girlfriend to say, I'm on my way to come pick you up now, are you ready? And he's going to leave, and here comes the police officer. You look like you were trying to get away from me. What?
did he file a complaint on him?
I don't know whether he did or not, but I know the officer made him get out of his car, sit on the sidewalk, don't move. Do you have any drugs in your car? I mean, and this happens to him regularly.
And we could, I appreciate the effort to want us to file a complaint, but I think in that situation, we just want to survive.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly.
You're not thinking about, oh, I'm going to tell him.
Don't cry.
I think that's what she was saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. After the interaction, I want you to get through I'm not saying you need to file a complaint with them. I'm saying after that interaction, because otherwise he's going to continue to, and then what's going to happen, that officer that you're talking about, the son, he's going to kill somebody, going to have the ride, and your son is saying, that's the same officer, and I didn't file a complaint, because you could have done something silly. But I mean,
I just think
that's not our
responsibility.
Real quick. I'm sure all of the officers are willing to talk with you afterwards. It is 3 o'clock, so we need to wrap this up. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the we needed more than an hour. And so hopefully we'll have an opportunity to revisit. And I'm sure they will make themselves available for one-on-one questions. Thank you very much.
But there were a situation in the greater Miami area where people were caught with charges trying to bring complaints against officers as well. Durham may be different than everywhere else, but certainly there are issues where in other cities people have brought complaints against officers and then opened themselves up to the legal system.
Right, and I think your piece about the sort of the blue line, like the fraternal support, I think that's the other fear too. So you can survive a situation, and you may want to go file a complaint, but you're filing a complaint against somebody's friend, somebody's, and so.
And you don't know what the retribution.
Yeah, you don't know what the retribution is going to be, and you don't know what officer is going to. Like, I mean, if we're going to have the conversation about fearing the community and the connection, you don't know who's protecting who. You just don't know as a citizen. So I learned a lot of things that I learned about. Maybe I learned about all these things I can do to file complaints. But like John Doe on the street who's living in a tough neighborhood doesn't know that when your interaction over years and years and years has been the police aren't supportive. Like how do you?
And then on top of that, you've had incidents in the past, and you've seen the Fraternal Order of Police come out and make a press statement on the officer's behalf before the evidence is
It doesn't help.
It doesn't help. It doesn't help at all.
I just want to make one practical point about data, because I think you've mentioned a few times that there's a need for officers to get better information and better data from the community, and we understand that there's probably severe
or extreme underreporting of incidents from the community, and that's probably driven by distrust, right?
Yes.
And so if police agencies understand that it's difficult to get quality data from the community about these types of incidents, then at what point do we start to integrate other sources of information to help us make policy decisions and to help us manage our police forces? Because you're probably not going to get quality data from the community. I mean, this has been going on for so many decades upon decades and decades that now I think it's time for us to be creative as a society and figure out how we can inform these policy decisions and management decisions in our forces from other data sources such as police cameras. And I think one of the things that has been extremely painful as an African American man is when we have evidence of excessive force that has now been recorded by body cameras, and then the decision from a jury still favors the officer who was clearly using excessive force.
And that's when we have to bring into the conversation.
That's right. Yeah, and I just wanted to ask, just to follow up too, like, I think what I'm struggling with is, and I definitely do understand what you're saying about the need for reporting, but I still feel like, kind of going back to what Mark said, like, it's almost like there's not an expectation that professionalism should be the baseline from the beginning. Like I don't like the idea that we should have to just get through an interaction. Like, if you switched it around and take everybody in here who's a physician or deals with patients, if you walked into a doctor's office and the doctor was mistreating you and it was a matter of life and death, similar to the way it would be for a cop, you would never have the expectation the patient should just get through the incident and then file a complaint. You'd want to stop it right then to make sure safety is held. So I guess what I'm struggling with is, why should, like, I mean, I guess this goes back to somebody else asked that question of, like, what's being done proactively to make sure the fiber of the people who are in these jobs is right. And I know you can never get it right and there are always going to be bad apples, but the levels of excessive force and all these things we keep hearing, it's indicating there's a certain type of person that seems to be getting drawn to these jobs that are getting hired and are perpetrating crimes against citizens. So I think that's what I'm struggling with, is like, I shouldn't have to just try to get through an interaction with a cop. I should feel safe if they pull me over that I'm not going to be penalized in some way just because of some bias that they hold. So I think that's what I'm struggling with, and I know there's no easy answer, but I just want to say the expectation should be that we are working with professionals who are compassionate and empathetic and love their community, like you're saying, not that these are rogue individuals that might be 50-50, maybe he's a good guy, maybe he's a bad guy. I'm just having a hard time with that.
There's nothing I can say to disagree with that. But I can also say to you that somebody that graduates from college with a history major can't get a job, right? Can't get a job. Popo always hired. Popo always hired. Right?
Well, I mean, okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And this is clean as a whistle. Clean as a whistle. Okay, but what the real thing is, they've never been up against some of the stuff they see in the street.
Yeah.
And now they you know, unless you've experienced real fear, that's a whole different ballgame. But you came into this agency, you know, you're a saint, you walk on water, but now you can't get a job in a history, and now you're a popo. Right. And now you're in front of somebody that scares you to death. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I got is this, and I make a decision, I make the wrong decision. He or she was supreme. So it has nothing to do with that. I mean, it has something to do with that, and they do all they can, but just gotta remember, we're hiring across the spectrum. And we're bringing individuals who are squeaky clean, but we're putting them in positions. So it's up to the police department to figure out how to train them and make them the way that they need to be, being professional. So,
and every state and every police department, their curriculums are not the same.
So the quality.
So there are, you know, there are some states that are still, you know, only doing about 400 hours worth of training for basic training. And then even within that 400 hours of training, if I've got an organization that's 1,800 people, well, how much training do you think I'm actually going to be able to give 1,800 people in a practical mindset? You know, I can give you the theories of policing, and I can give you the laws and teach you those things and help you pass. But when it's actually engaging the public, the community policing side, how much practical skills am I going to really be able to expose 1,800 members of an organization? Or a class that's 75 students. I'm not gonna be able to do that. So it's about the level of training from the beginning through the remainder of their career that has to take place. And as she said earlier, some organizations just can't do that. But then the minimum standard that the state requires, organizations have to recognize that they have to go beyond that, which is what we do.
Chief, tell them the minimum is what for the state?
Right now, I think it's 618.
And how much more do you guys
No,
give them?
for graduation from the academy.
Yeah, what is it now?
670.
670.
And how much got?
And so we're at
So
least
70 hours?
The minimum.
$670 minimum
BLET.
for the state of North Carolina. We exceed that probably by another 400 to 1,200. 400 to 600.
That's
When
When do they get their gun?
6-7 months. 6 months. Is that day and night?
Oh, when you swear in. You get your gun when you
Before the
get hired, but
670.
you don't get
So I know the purpose
So
of
you
the
get your
next
gun
panel
and
wasn't
get
for us
hired,
to
but you don't get
beat up on you guys, you know, so we recognize that you guys have a very difficult job, and many of you are doing extremely well. I think the thing that I would just put back on the table one more time is that, and this is similar to the chief's point, is that in many instances, we just don't have the resources or the time to train people appropriately. And so what that means then is that in addition to thinking about how we're training people, maybe we can put more emphasis on how we select people. Because maybe the person who is deemed to be squeaky clean is only deemed to be that way because we have the wrong metrics that we are assessing to determine how fit they are for the position. And maybe there are some additional tools that can be added into the selection process. It's similar to what we do here. So this is a research organization. You know, if we're trying to help some pharmaceutical company answer a question between drug A and drug B, the quality of our question is going to be based on the quality of the data that we collect, right? And so if you select bad, then you're going to get bad stuff in the community, no matter how much you train or whatever else. But if you select well, then maybe you don't have that increased burden to do so much training because you just selected a better quality candidate from the beginning.
Talk to that man right there, they'd be more than willing, I'm sure they'd love that.
Yeah. Is there an effort from the police department to train the public about how to interact with you? Because when something goes bad, you know, everybody's on Facebook, they're looking at the interaction. And I'm raising 2 boys, I'm not white, I'm not black. I'm telling my boys, this is not how you behave. You put your hand up, you make sure you follow every single word that the policeman tells you to do. So is there any effort from the police department to train the rest of the community?
So we have what we call Citizens Police Academy. And you know, I wanted to get this in. I wish some people still here, but we have we do 6 weeks interaction with us, and you get to go through behind the scenes of what we do. And then we go through a decision-making course with you and everything. And a lot of people, when they come out of that course, their perception is a little bit different than when they went in. And so we also have what we call now DPD University, where we have a menu where you can select, we'll come to your site and we'll do a presentation if you have a question about something. And I think that's one of the things that's helping the community to better understand policing.
I'm just wondering if, like, there's a video on a Facebook, something that could reach more people than just a few people that come through your university.
The program that Deputy Chief Counsel has, UN50, we're in partnership with her to present those classes, her training. And it's specifically that, about how to interact and how to get through that interaction with law enforcement. If you feel like it's a negative interaction, the whole goal is for you to succeed through that interaction, get beyond that, and then let's follow the course of action that needs to take place to ensure these types of interactions are not continuing to happen with individuals in law enforcement. So she has a great program that is instrumental in helping us communicate that message externally from the police department's programs.
Thank you.
Yeah.